Greetings of the day, Paul sir. You are muted right now. You can unmute yourself so that we can check the audio at your end, sir.
Good afternoon or good evening. How's the audio quality from my end?
It's audible, sir. Your audio is quite clear at our end.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I'll just add all our speakers of the session as co-hosts so that they can unmute. Greetings of the day, Vairam sir. I have added you as a co-host, so you will be able to unmute yourself, sir. Uh, sure.
How are you, Vedam?
This session is also being live streamed on YouTube. I'm sharing the YouTube link on the comments. So if any of your friends will be like to join the session on the YouTube, they can do that perfectly. I'm just sharing the YouTube live streaming link on the chat right away. Thank you. I'll also like to introduce Major General Ashok Kumar sir from India to our respected speakers of today, our moderator Paul sir from Greece and Vairam sir from Armenia. Major General Ashok Kumar sir goes by the Google name Indigenous Indians. He is in the meeting right now. You can also be able to see him on your screens as well. Thank you. So since this session is also being live streamed on YouTube, so we can have few of the questions coming from YouTube as well, and we'll be taking up those questions in a very brief question and answer session, which we'll be having at the end of this session. I can see Michael sir also. I'll just add him as a co-host so that he can also speak. Uh, Greetings of the day, Michael sir. If you can unmute yourself so that we can check the audio at your end.
Hi there. Hi, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll be beginning this session in a couple of minutes from now. Thank you. It's 6 p.m. now in India, and with the due permission of our speakers, I'll now like to begin this session. I'll now like to introduce our moderator of this session, respected Paul Sir from Greek City Times. He is the editor of Greek City Times, and he is also a doctoral researcher based in Athens. He has a special interest in international relations with a particular focus on multipolarity and the geographical space between ancient civilizational countries stretching from Greece to India. He also holds a master's in international relations from Western Sydney University. I welcome you, sir, to this session, and I'll now like to hand over the dais to you for further moderation. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Well, firstly, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us, considering that it is such a turbulent time at this moment. Just a few short weeks ago, Azerbaijan completed its ethnic cleansing of indigenously and historically Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh, but the world's limited attention on the Caucasus has already been forgotten about. It's already been moved on, and it's been shifted over to the events that we currently see in the Middle East today. It was only 10 months ago when Red Lantern Analytica, Network State, and other partners held the webinar Indo-Greek Armenian Strategic Cooperation to tackle caliphate designs, where, among other things, the threat posed by the three brothers' axis, Turkey, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan, was identified, and strategies to deal with this threat were discussed. Since then, however, the three brothers' axis has acted, and they've conquered Nagorno-Karabakh, changing the geostrategic situation in the Caucasus. It is rather apt that today Red Lantern Analytica and Network State once again organized another webinar, focusing on Azerbaijan's aggression over Armenia's Nagorno-Karabakh, because today it is 20 years since the beginning of dictator Ilham Aliyev's rule in Azerbaijan. He took over power from his father, Haydar Aliyev, and even named his wife vice president since then. Azerbaijan has been an autocratic and authoritarian country under Aliyev. He has not allowed any serious opposition, and he's absolutely smashed minority rights. However, he has been a very shrewd leader and utilized his country's wealth and fostered relationships to help with the final goal of conquering Nagorno-Karabakh and even territories of the Republic of Armenia. Even as recently as 2 days ago, on October 13, Israel transported a shipment of weapons to Azerbaijan despite the war with Gaza and Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran all threatening to attack Israel. At the same time, however, Hamas and Iran have all previously praised Azerbaijan's conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh. So this demonstrates that even though the world is focusing on the events in the Middle East, they are not detached from events in the Caucasus. To help us understand current events, we have 4 speakers today. Each of them will have 10 minutes to speak. Our first speaker is retired Indian Major General Ashok Kumar, who will talk about the background of the crisis and the military overview of where things stand today. Next will be Vahan Zanorian, who will cover the security challenges for Armenia from Azerbaijan and how the recent dynamics creates a new challenge. Vadim Ayvazian will be the third and will talk about the historical context of the Nagorno-Karabakh linkage with Armenia and how Armenians have faced Turkish hostility in centuries previous and right up until today. And finally, Michael Nassisian will cover the role the UN can play, the need for awareness of the Azerbaijani aggression, and what can be done to increase stakeholders' involvement in the crisis. I'll now open the floor to retired Major General Ashok Kumar, a veteran of the 1990 Kargil War, where fighting took place in some of the most inhospitable places on earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Jai Hind and good evening to everybody. At the outset, let me thank the team Red Lantern Analytica for organizing a very, very important subject for this webinar. My co-panelists and all the listeners who are listening at this moment or who will be able to see this sometime later as and when they get an opportunity. Frankly speaking, this world has always been an unequal world. I will not take you all historically too back in time and just cover only the recent trends. You would have seen when Russia conducted special operations in February 22 onwards against Ukraine, the whole world rallied, all international organizations rallied uh, in support of the people of Ukraine who were getting displaced, moved, and things like that. As we speak today, the Israel and Hamas conflict is going on. Again, just see the kind of involvement and response of the whole world, uh, whether it is United States of America or other NATO countries, the international organizations. Everybody is rallying to the cause. Some of them are supporting Israel because they feel that they have been harmed by Hamas, but a substantial number of people are also highlighting the suffering of the Palestinian people. India, for one, can relate with the event which happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, wherein a large-scale Armenian people got displaced, and just last month. Because in August 97, when India got partitioned in two countries as part of the British India legacy, we saw a large-scale migration in form of partition from West Pakistan to India and vice versa. And there were huge suffering. Probably the countries and the people who have seen the pain of migration of indigenous people can correlate better with the Nagorno-Karabakh population of Armenia, which has got almost in entirety close to 1 lakh people got displaced, whereas the total population is close to 1.20 lakhs or so from that place. But surprisingly, the whole world, I am yet to find, I keep monitoring the geopolitical developments, but not as intense as Paul would be doing. But there has been no hue and cry. The world has not taken note of such a catastrophic thing which has happened, and still it is in oblivion from that. So I think somehow it is our responsibility of those people who are giving their thoughts in the geopolitical domain, the government of Armenia, their well-wishers, to bring this to the fore so that the people are aware about what is happening. Now, having said that as a background, I will draw your attention to the map which has been flashed, because that is where a major cause of conflict lies. If you just follow the cursor, you'll find the Azerbaijan in this color. So it is contiguous here, but one part of Azerbaijan is here on the western side of Armenia. Armenia is in a different color here, and what is shown is red, is Nagorno-Karabakh, in a way part of Armenia only. Now, again, I could have taken you to the days of Ottoman Empire and pre-1918 days when USSR and these areas entered into conflict, and both Armenia and Azerbaijan became part of the erstwhile Soviet Republic. But I will not take you that far because time is limited. But what I would like to highlight, that there is a peculiarity of ethnic population and the peculiarity of the geographic areas. If you see Armenia, 98% plus people are Armenian, and they are primarily the Christians. And similar profile exists in the Nagorno-Karabakh also, whereas the people are of Armenian ethnicity and also of the Christian religious connect. As against that, the Azerbaijan, they have the similar number of percentage people who are speaking Turkey, and they are predominantly Muslims. And of course, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Pakistan, our western neighbor, they are in a close concert with each other. More on this later once I analyze as to what is the involvement of India and why so. So if you really see, once in 1991, Soviet Union got disintegrated. It was at that time this, Armenia and Azerbaijan came up as a separate countries, independent countries. That time, the Nagorno-Karabakh was also given somewhat independent status, though it never got recognized as an independent country the world over, but remained as an Armenian connect. The geographical connect was through Lachin Corridor, which is actually a mountain pass through which the Armenia can connect to the Nagorno-Karabakh. Of course, this portion of Azerbaijan, which is on the western and southern portion of Armenia, is known as Nakhchivan Enclave. And this doesn't have any direct connectivity as of now with the Azerbaijan directly, as close it is existing here in between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, the conflict started about the control of this area and its integration in Armenia, though it existed in that manner since long back, both on the its de jure international recognition and also because of the ethnic connect between these two geographical areas. So in 1988, actually the first war of Nagorno-Karabakh started between Armenia and Azerbaijan. You also must take a note that the size of Azerbaijan army is twice the size of Armenian army. And while Armenian army fights with its troops from its own country, in the fight of Azerbaijan, besides the people of Azerbaijan, the people from Turkey, people from Chechen, and number of other mercenaries also fight along with them. That is a kind of major difference in the way of fighting and the composition of the fighting forces. But despite all that, the first war, though it continued for almost 6 years from 1988 to 1994, but it was won by Armenia in a clear terms. And that was the time that the Nagorno-Karabakh got unified with Armenia, and it was almost accepted. It was given an impression as if the future conflicts between Azerbaijan and Armenia will not take place, though despite efforts of multiple regional and international organizations, no peace agreement, so to say, in real terms, could get signed between the two countries. But as then there was a peace, somewhat of peace for about 14 years from 1994 to 2008. But from 2008, a different kind of trend had started emerging. And if I think it from the military viewpoint, I think this trend got overlooked by Armenia. Because in 2008, the Marda-Kurd clashes took place, and this was between Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh had its own government and its own forces. Of course, Armenia was always supporting entire because it was part of Armenia as well. But in these clashes of 2008, a kind of stalemate existed. There were no major gains and losses. Both Azerbaijan as well as Nagorno-Karabakh claimed victories, but the status quo continued. Thereafter, after every alternate year, there has been a clash initiated by Azerbaijan. It happened in 2010, it happened in 2012, it happened in 2014. Till 2014, the change in the territorial boundaries was not much. There were minor, incursions here and there, but not much. The end state of first Nagorno-Karabakh war was maintained. But in 2016, things started changing more in favor of Azerbaijan. Uh, though this conflict of 2016, the clash, so to say, also remained inconclusive. But it was this time wherein few heights of Nagorno-Karabakh area were captured by Azerbaijan. This capture of 2016 was further enlarged in the clash 2 years later, again in 2018, wherein around 15 square kilometer was added to the erstwhile capture of mountainous area. And 2020, again after 2 years, there's a special trend that every 2 years the conflict is taking place. Probably 1 year was being taken to consolidate, regroup, and then again that kind of effort was being made by Azerbaijan on a sustained basis. So it took place again 2020. But whatever was gained by Azerbaijan in 2014 and 16, it could not extend the further gains, and again the stalemate continued. But the second Nagorno, because all these were clashes except the first Nagorno-Karabakh war, which was for 6 years from 1988 to 1994. The second war started in 2020. In 2020 war, there was sizable gain in favor of Azerbaijan. They were able to capture few cities, more than 280 villages, and certain number of other areas. So this was a totally reversal of trend, as has been the pattern earlier. But it has been, if one sees a thread from 2014 onwards, this has been a trend in favor of Azerbaijan. Now, whether these clashes which were taking place and whether Azerbaijan was preparing for the second war, where it had gained certain areas, was observed by Armenia or not, I cannot comment. But even if they had observed, did they take adequate military measures to address that threat? Again, I can't comment. We have excellent speakers who will be speaking after me, and I'm sure they will dwell on this. But thereafter, again, 21, 22, the clashes between these areas took place. And finally, in 23, in the clashes which happened in Azerbaijan and Armenia on Nagorno-Karabakh, it was a massive attack by Azerbaijan and targeting basically the civil population. In fact, the basic norms and ethos of the war fighting between the countries are, against the security elements and those resources which support the security element. But it was targeted against the population, which forced the almost all Armenian population, which is the native population of Nagorno-Karabakh, to migrate from there to shift to Armenia for saving their life. The old age people, the ladies, the children, everybody, moved there. And such a, firstly, even in size of migration, it was, close to 1 lakh. In terms of percentage, it was more than 80% of the total population of this enclave. And despite this, migration, the whole world has been, surprisingly for me, been, sleeping on this issue, and it has not come to the fore. To that extent, Red Lantern Analytica and the speakers after me will be doing a great justice, giving out the logic, articulation, a way out for the solution, of this issue. Of course, the next fault line is the Nakhchivan enclave, because if Armenia is not able to reverse the trend here by a conventional war for the Nagorno-Karabakh, the emboldened Azerbaijan, with its support from Turkey, and also Iran is also getting pro-Azerbaijan, so they may address this Nakhchivan enclave fault line, which is of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has been demanding a corridor from its mainland to this enclave through Armenia, but that hasn't come through, because probably the corridor length is going to be much more. So as of now, they're thinking of some alternative corridor skirting the Armenia, going through Iran. Let us see how it fans out and how the events in Nakhchivan unfolds. But I think as we see ahead, the fault lines at Nakhchivan will grow if Armenia is unable to take back Nagorno-Karabakh back from Azerbaijan. Now, coming to the resolution issue, firstly, it is not a simple issue, and the solution of one place cannot be really extrapolated to that place because of the dynamics being totally different. But we have a solution which can be looked at, which happened in the land border settlement between India and Bangladesh, where there were a lot of enclaves of Bangladesh in Indian territory and vice versa. And there were some major enclaves of Bangladesh in India, which they were not able to even access. They had to go through India, and the famous Teen Bigha corridor, you would have heard about that. But in the resolution between the two countries, what they decided, they sought the views of all the residents of those enclaves, whether you want to remain there as part of India to Bangladesh or want to migrate. And based on the will of the population, then the enclaves were exchanged. Of course, India was being larger country, it was large-hearted and gave more than what it got. The issue of Teen Bigha corridor was essential for Bangladesh, but that was not in a position to be given by India. So they gave a lease to that area so that connectivity and functional requirements are met. I think here the similar kind of arrangement could be done, where Nagorno-Karabakh be part of Armenia with the consent of Azerbaijan, and the Lachin corridor could be given voluntarily, as against which was taken by Armenia in first Nagorno-Karabakh war. It be little widened. In reciprocal mode, the Azerbaijan the Armenia can also consider a similar enclave corridor to be given at some one end, so that its own
sincere apologies to
concerns are not addressed, and that could be one model. Alternatively, now since the Nagorno-Karabakh has already been vacated by the entire Armenian population, there could be the Nagorno-Karabakh could be part of Azerbaijan, and the Nakhchivan enclave could be part of Armenia. It will have a contiguous connect as far as the geography is concerned, but will have major adverse ramifications as far as ethnicity is concerned. Which is
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, sir, but
so
I'm sorry.
this, I close my content, whatever I have to say. If there are questions, so I shall take that in the end. Over to the host, please.
Thank you for that very detailed explanation, General. I'd like to put us on to our next speaker, who will go into much more detail than what was already provided by our previous one. So I'd like to introduce us to Vahan.
Paul, thank you very much, and I thank the Red Lantern also for this initiative. What I'd like to do, Paul, with your permission, is go over some of the various dimensions of this conflict, because a lot of people, this is a very kind of complicated and interrelated, different dimensions have come together to play to cause this. And if you look at the map, it looks like a very tiny little place, and you wonder why all this global interest in it, or why all these geopolitical implications of it. And I'd like to outline, it's many dimensions, but I'd like to outline just 8 major ones very briefly, maybe a minute or so each. First, at the very basic, at the root level, there is the local or / regional dimension, whereby it is a struggle between an indigenous population, and which are mostly Armenian, and relatively new settlers, which are the Azeris, which actually themselves are the various different tribes, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon as a country. But the settler phenomenon has longer history than the country, but still recent relative to the indigenous population. Now, what the indigenous population has is a very long history, is a culture, it very deep roots to the land. For it, it's a homeland. It's not real estate, and it's kind of used to living with a lot of freedom and with its own kind of self-determination issues. For the recent settlers, it has two major strengths. Number one, the enclave is recognized as part of Azerbaijan. Okay, I'll come to that in the second issue. And number two, it has superior military force right now. So this is at the very root cause of the conflict. And there is also here another element which I'm not going to have time to discuss, which is the settlers look at this as a real estate, I said, but the real estate is very rich. Very few people talk about the mineral resources of Nagorno-Karabakh. It's extremely rich in gold, in molybdenum, in iron, even in uranium. So whereas the indigenous population looks at it as a homeland, the settlers look at it as a resource. There is the second dimension, which is worth mentioning, and that's going to take a very long time to do, so I will very briefly touch on it, is the legal dimension. There is no defensible legal basis to have Azerbaijan, to have Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. Now, this is very complicated because there are different international laws that govern how internal borders of a large political entity become external borders or international borders once that big political entity disintegrates and evolves into its different component parts. In this case, Soviet Union, there were internal borders during the Soviet time between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And once Armenia and Azerbaijan became independent states after the collapse of the Soviet Union, those internal borders were taken as a guide to create the international border between the two. The problem with this, and the two problems with this, number one, that Armenia before the Soviet Union was an independent state, and the League of Nations has the first comprehensive map recognized by the League of Nations of Armenia, in which, by the way, both Nakhichevan and Nagorno-Karabakh were part of Armenia at the time. So that's one problem. Second problem is the internal borders when it was Soviet Union changed so many times. The borders in 1920 were different than in 1921, then different than in 1922. The borders changed again in 1926. They changed again in 1932, and so on and so forth. So there is the issue of, okay, even if you're going to use the internal borders and to make them international, which ones do you use? There are all kinds of legal complications here, but the point that I'm trying to make is that there is no way to legally defend the status of Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. And in my humble opinion, one of the biggest failures or failings of Armenia during the last 30 years was not to make this case properly in international courts, in the United Nations, which is a legal successor of the League of Nations. And because of that, to this day, we automatically say recognized as part of Azerbaijan as if without anybody challenging it. The third dimension, which the good general addressed to some extent, is the broader geopolitical dimension of this. If you look at the map that he had put, and unfortunately I don't have a map, but I think it's still vivid in the minds of people who were listening to the general. There is a north-south axis and there's an east-west or west-east axis. The west-east axis is from basically Europe, but via Turkey being the main player, via Armenia, all the way to China and Asia and India. And the northwest is from Iran, north, all the way via Armenia, Georgia, and Russia, and up. This is a very important two axes because they have both geopolitical influence implications, and they have also very important trade routes, land trade route implications. The Red Lantern recently, by the way, published two very important, small, short, but very important articles on precisely the geopolitics of trade routes. Those who are interested in how geopolitics and trade routes play should refer to those articles. One was by former Armenian Minister of High Technology, Haik Chobanyan, and the other one was by myself. But it's an interesting way to present the geopolitical, to combine this north, south, east, west axes geopolitics with the trade routes. This is how, by the way, both India and China and Europe, and they all get interested in this topic, okay? Because at the very center of the north-south and east-west axis is Armenia and Artsakh. If you look at the map, it's right in the middle of the crosshairs of those two axes. The fourth dimension of this is the multilateral diplomatic efforts that took place. As many of you who have followed the conflict know, there was for a long time the OSCE Minsk group with three co-chairs, United States, France, and Russia being co-chairs of the Minsk group, trying to negotiate a peace settlement between Azerbaijan and Armenia on the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. In those days, Armenia was kind of at the seat instead of Nagorno-Karabakh representing the interest of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. But this was aside from the three co-chairs, Belarus, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Finland, Turkey were actually part of it too, and Azerbaijan was part of that Minsk group, but the co-chairs were running the negotiations. All this diplomatic effort, as you know, didn't go very far. There were sometimes, seemed like there was going to be progress, but then in 2020, Azerbaijan took matters in its own hands and did the war. Now, this brings me to the military dimension, which the general addressed. And all I want to do is emphasize that this was perhaps the most unequal battle in recent history. First of all, Azeri forces outnumber Armenia by a very large percentage, up to two, almost four times back in 2020. But that's not the only thing. Armenia had managed to deal with that in the past, like the general said, back in the early 90s. But Azerbaijan had full logistical and planning support from Turkey. Turkey is the second largest NATO army, with all the NATO military capabilities attached to it. There were, in addition to just the logistical and planning support, there were over 1,000 elite Turkish troops involved in the fighting in 2020. There were a few thousand jihadist mercenaries brought by Turkey, also fighting. Higher military expenditures by tens of billions of dollars Azerbaijan had than Armenia. There were also serious input here from Israel, both Israeli military hardware, drones, but also military intelligence gathering and sharing. Then there was also full cooperation from Georgia, Armenia's northern neighbor, in the form of Georgia totally kept its airspace open for military airplanes, equipment to fly from Israel over Georgia into Baku, but it wouldn't allow airspace to come from anywhere else into Armenia. So, I mean, these odds were so incredible that the 2020 war was already, the destiny was sealed before it even started. Okay, so that's the military dimension of it. Now, there's another dimension which also very few people talk about, and that's the sixth dimension of the conflict that I'd like to talk about, which is the oil and gas factor. Now, Azerbaijan is a major oil and gas producer, not as major, by the way, as it likes people to think, because there's some exaggeration of the potential of Azerbaijan, especially gas. But there are several major infrastructure multi-billion projects which have tied Western commercial interests to the interests of Azerbaijan. And that was a major factor in the war, and that's a major factor in the overall geopolitical thinking and in the publicity that goes with it. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, operated by British Petroleum, where partners are British Petroleum, SOCAR, which is the Azeri oil company, Chevron, Turkish Petroleum Company, ENI, Total, Itochu, Impex, ConocoPhillips, Hess. What you can see here is a partnership between Turkish, Azeri oil companies and a lot of Western oil companies. So the Western oil company interests and the Azeri oil and Turkish oil company interests are tied together here. The Baku-Tbilisi-Erzurum gas pipeline, again, operated by British Petroleum. It's one of the reasons why Britain has been all along, not just Britain, the BBC has been all along very pro-Azeri in its rhetoric and in its narrative. The Baku-Supsa pipeline, again, operator British Petroleum. British Petroleum is heavily invested in Azerbaijan. Okay, and again, partners SOCAR and the Azerbaijan International Operating Company. Nabucco gas pipeline. Here, partners are Botash, which is Turkish, Bulgarian, Austrian, and Romanian oil companies, and so on and so forth. So there is, let's not forget the hydrocarbons, petroleum, and the gas dimension of this conflict, which has affected the outcome and the narrative. I'd like to stress a seventh very important dimension, which is the ethnic cleansing dimension. Now, lately, as the general said, over 100,000 people left their ancestral homes. Okay, that's a very key initial part of the ethnic cleansing. But Azerbaijan has a very interesting history of erasing everything, every trace of Armenian past in the land. They did this in Nakhichevan. In Nakhichevan, that enclave on the western part of Azerbaijan used to be part of Armenia. When the Armenians were pushed out, just like they were pushed out now from Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan went and very methodically eliminated 28,000 Armenian monuments from that region. I can be very precise here because it's been documented: 89 churches, 5,840 cross stones, 22,000 tombstones. So today you go to Nakhichevan, they say, what? There were no Armenians here. This is indigenous Azerbaijani land. This brings me back to the very first dimension. The reason I stress the first dimension, which is the indigenous population versus the settlers, is because this urge to erase even every trace of the indigenous population is to, in a way, manipulate history, to change, to come up, and to this day, Aliyev still says that this is historic Azeri lands. Armenians came here, they're the Johnny-come-latelys, we were here first. Okay? Now, the same fate awaits Nagorno-Karabakh. In Nagorno-Karabakh, there are 370 Armenian churches. There are 119 Armenian fortresses. There are over 240 Armenian cemeteries, from starting with the 2nd century BC all the way to the 18th century. Now, this is at risk because if their past behavior in Nakhichevan, which was 100 years ago, is any indication, this is going to happen again. And again, it's been driven by a urge to fight history, to change history, and to create its own narrative. And here, this brings me to the 8th dimension, which is the information war. The Azerbaijani propaganda machine has been working overnight since the 2020 war. The narrative has been incredibly changed and influenced by them, by the way. They spent much more resources than Armenia ever has. Even the Armenian diaspora, which is involved in the lobbying here and there, and more advocacy groups than lobbying groups, but cannot match the financial resources that Azerbaijan has. The interesting thing is that these 8 dimensions that I mentioned are all related with each other, combined, and one reinforces the other. I think my time is up, Paul. I'd like to stop here, and if there are any questions, I'd like to be able to actually address during the question answer period or some of the other speakers the issue of this famous Zangezur corridor, because that has both geopolitical and trade and all kinds of other implications. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Vahan. We'll definitely be having some questions directed towards you at the end of this speaking session. And in a very concise way, putting it down towards 8 points, I think, is a very effective method that could perhaps be written into an article one time soon as a kind of way to fully address and fully understand what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Varan Ayvazian, who founded and is on the board as chairman at the Network State. So the Network State is a pan-Armenian movement with the mission of reviving the Armenian civilization as a communicator and uniting Armenians worldwide. He is, of course, also a genocide scholar.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks everyone. Thanks to Red Lantern Analytica for co-organizing this event with the Network State. I'm very happy to have you all here. Well, I mean, yeah, we are, the previous 2 speakers covered very interesting details actually about the conflict and about the ongoing developments vis-a-vis Nagorno-Karabakh problem. Actually, first and foremost, I would like to note that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is just a small part of this big Armenian question, you know, because if we put it in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and we try to narrow it, then we definitely face problems. Because if we look back, if you go back to the 19th century and you see what is happening to the indigenous Armenian population in the Armenian highlands, we see that there has been a systematic actually fight against the Armenians to wipe them out from their ancestral land. And I'm talking about Western Armenia, which is in nowadays Turkey, which, I mean, in 1950, you all know that, I mean, Armenian genocide story. I'm talking about the League of Nations, as Vahan Zanoyan mentioned, where the map actually clearly showed that Nakhichevan and Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh were part of Armenia, the First Republic of Armenia, which lasted from 1918 to 1920, before it goes Sovietized. And of course, I mean, all these ethnic cleansings and genocide and pogroms by the Ottoman Empire, by the Turks, Ataturk's Turkey, and also by Azerbaijan. All this come to say that there has been a systematic, actually, struggle against the Armenian nation throughout the Armenian highland to wipe the indigenous people from their land. And that is why I am, in my opinion, I always consider Azerbaijan as a project, as a part of Turan. You know, I don't know whether you have heard of it. Turan is a project which is about like Turkification, like making a huge area. I mean, from the Balkans to China, making it a Turkish area. Like it's called Turan project, and Azerbaijan is one of the champions and campaigners of this project, and it's a very anti-Armenian project per se. Azerbaijan, I must say. So this actually is a very sad, I mean, story for the Armenian nation, because, as I said, if we look this, I mean, the conflict, as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, narrowing it, then we kind of miss that one Turkey's, I mean, ideology, that one Turkey's aggressive, I mean, plan, which is the main, I mean, factor to blame for all this. Because when Zanoyan mentioned that he hopes that next speakers will talk about the Zangezur corridor, if we look at the map, we will see that there is a narrow, if you remember the map that the general showed, I mean, the Sunik region is a narrow, I mean, region in the south of Armenia, and that is what we call Zangezur, the Zangezur corridor. So basically, it is like a hindrance to this Turan project, because it kind of blocks the Turkish war to get connected with each other. Because if you look at the map, you see that there is Turkey, Azerbaijan, and then you have this stance, like, I mean, this Asian country stance, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, like Tajikistan, etc., right? So all these get connected with each other, and we all know what influence Turkey already has in this stance in these 5 countries, and Azerbaijan. So it means that that if they wipe out Zangezur as an Armenian establishment, then they will definitely, I mean, pave the road for the Turan project to succeed. So this is a very important thing, and I do hope that that this is taken seriously into granted, right, by, for example, Indian policymakers. Because if you look at the map, you see that this Turan project reaches the Indian doors, it reaches the Chinese doors, right? It reaches, I mean, the Far East. And I'm not even talking about Russia, because people were mentioning here about, I mean, right, I mean, the Azeris getting support from Turkey, from Pakistan. Actually, Pakistan also participated in the Artsakh, the Nagorno-Karabakh 2020 war, with logistical support and with also intelligence support. And Israel, of course. I would also mention this Russian, I mean, phenomenon. Though they are or were considered our allies, they didn't act, which is a very sad story itself. And why I mentioned Russia, because this Turan project is also against Russia. I hope that Russian policymakers one day will understand what they have been doing. So basically, they have actually been playing with fire. And so this Turan project is a danger to the world, not only to Armenia. So that is why I am championing for India-Armenia deeper ties. What I mean when I say deeper ties, first of all, we must acknowledge that we have had thousands of years of connection with each other. I'm talking about even more than 10,000 of connection with each other, 10,000 years of connection with each other. This is important factor. So we know each other very well as nations, as civilizations within the big Indo-European civilizational picture. That's the first thing. So we must, I mean, develop this civilizational platform between us. The second thing is, of course, this geopolitical strategic alliance. It means that India and Armenia, on state level and on non-state level, which means also on diaspora levels, must, I mean, cooperate for 100%. So there must not be any questions here, because we understand that we are dealing with Turan and Pakistan together. And in one of my interviews, I think I covered about it, about how dangerous is the marriage, is the ugly marriage between Pakistan, Turkey, and Azerbaijan is for Armenia and for India. So this geopolitical, after the geopolitical comes the military, of course, deeper ties. Of course, we know that India wants to, India is sending arms, etc. But I think that's not enough. We must champion for the Indian military base in Armenia. Why? Because the Indian presence will kind of balance the region, because we need Indians here as our allies to to show that Armenia has a strategic partner, because sometimes when you say that you have strategic partner, Armenians have been suffering with this, by the way. So it turned out that we haven't had during these 30 years. We know that what happened in 2020 when the Russians, I mean, how the Russians acted. So Indians' presence in Armenia is a must in military, I mean, terms. And I am one of the actually most vigorous, I mean, champions, I mean, for this. You know, I'm championing for it. And also the economic, I mean, presence. And this economic presence is very important in terms of this corridor issue. Again, coming back to this corridor and the Zangezur problem, Van Zanoyan and Tayyip Chobanyan, who was the former minister of high-tech industry, they published articles about this corridor. I mean, the South-North corridor. I mean, basically, it is a must to work on. It is a must to bring it into life. Why? Because India connecting with Iran and Iran connecting with Armenia to Georgia to Black Sea, this can be kind of a revival of the Indo-European civilizational trade route. So this is a must to acknowledge it. And going from the Black Sea to Greece and then to Europe. So we definitely cover those issues, but I think we need international partners for this, and especially the more vigorous and more aggressive, in a positive sense, more aggressive Indian participation. So I would conclude actually that this Artsakh problem, and then now this possible Azeri potential attack on Armenia on Syunik region, which I mean internationally people call Zangezur, is not the problem for Armenia. Just it is only for Armenia. It's a problem for the world, for India, for China, for the West, for the collective West, for Russia, especially, right? Because I mean, if this Turan project succeeds, then it will become a headache for many parts of the world. So that's one important thing. And the second important thing, we Armenians are in dire need of actually balancing the region, and we do think that the only country to be able to truly balance it, and which corresponds to the geopolitical circumstances worldwide, is India, because India can be a good negotiator, but with the West, I mean with the US and NATO, whatever, and with Russia, who is still, present in the region. So basically, this is one of the key things that I would like, to cover, and I would be happy to answer any questions regarding this. But again, I'm reiterating, I am championing for vigorous, more active, and more aggressive Indian participation in Armenia and in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Vadim, for the valuable insight. We'll definitely delve more deeper into what you said after our final speaker, who I'll introduce, Michael Nassisian, who is also a network state citizen and a UK-based Armenian journalist specialized in international trade, who, just like Vadim, spoke at last year's webinar that we had organized.
Thank you very much, Paul, and to Red Lantern Analytica for organizing and inviting me for this meeting. Look, I think the ethnic cleansing that we saw last month in Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh in some ways was expected, because it was reasonably well, the intention of doing so was reasonably well flagged by the Azerbaijani side, but also at the same time, I think it took some by surprise. Based on the news and the stories and the things that came out soon after it, and things that happened just before it, I think the Azeri attack took many in the West by surprise. Only 2-3 days before it happening, there was very strong language from the US State Department which I don't think would have happened if they had a clear idea of what was going on, because fundamentally it made them look silly. And it made them look that they didn't know what was going on. And, you know, similarly, I think the things that happened also did the same for the Russians. It made them look weak, and also the killing of their peacekeepers that happened at the time. And while the Russian government seems to have brushed that under the carpet a fair bit, if you follow Russian bloggers, especially those, you know, call them nationalists, call them patriots, whatever you like, they're displeased and they're discontented and unhappy about everything that's been happening. And you know, taking over Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan has ended up costing it a lot of political capital. And if you think about it, for what? Azerbaijan had all of the high cards in its hands, and it could have achieved everything that it wanted to achieve with a bit more patience and a bit more in a more calmer manner, if you like, but it didn't. I've heard some people say, including Armenians, that, oh, the Azerbaijanis are being very cunning, they're being very clever, they're using their geopolitical position well. And to that, I would say yes and no. On the one hand, yes, they do have those advantages, and they are blackmailing and pressurizing those that they can. But on the other hand, there's two aspects. First, if you think about it in terms of an Azerbaijanis, let's say I am an Azerbaijani patriot, right? I want my country to succeed and to become wealthy. Has anything that's happened here helped towards that? No, it's done the opposite. It's lined up a lot of people against you. It's made you, despite the narrative being dampened somewhat, it's made you look as the aggressor, clearly. You've taken part in ethnic cleansing, and despite the fact that there hasn't been a particularly strong reaction, sooner or later that can come and really bite you, because at any point, any of the major regional or global powers, should they choose to use that, and can very easily use that, when there was absolutely no need to have done any of this and still achieve everything that they wanted to. And all of that leads me to conclude that Azerbaijan is making a lot of mistakes. It seems like they're being very clever and they're very cunning, but actually they're making quite a lot of mistakes. And to use an analogy, you know the cliche about the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, one at a time, you're putting a bit more weight on, but sooner or later, it's going to reach a point that it's unsustainable, and it will break. And there's a TV show, a British TV show about politics from the 80s, I think. And there's a scene in there where the political leader wants to make a decision, and his advisor says to him, you know, is telling him not to do it. The political leader insists, and he says, all right, if you're going to do this damn silly thing, don't do it in this damn silly way. And I think what's been happening in Azerbaijan and the decisions by the Azerbaijani leadership has been along those lines. They've done a bad thing, and they've done it in a bad way. Now, in terms of the role of the UN here, generally speaking, I think the UN is struggling a little bit to stay relevant. There's a lot of negative sentiment, certainly where I am in the West, towards the UN, about it being effectively out of date and useless. And, you know, sooner or later, this East-West struggle, it's either going to lead to one of the sides winning, or more likely, it's going to have to lead to a compromise. And they're going to have to compromise on a lot of points. And what better place, really, to start with than the Caucasus, this region, where there is, I would say, if you exclude Turkey and Azerbaijan and just look at the global powers, there is probably the most consensus that they can have, loosely speaking, on this region where they respect each other's boundaries. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about all of the events that happen in Nagorno-Karabakh going unnoticed by the general public. This is true, but it hasn't gone unnoticed by the elites of all of the countries. And fundamentally, it is these elites that make the decisions. And, you know, again, going back to the point of Azerbaijan's aggressive, very, very aggressive, and Turkey's very aggressive positioning, when you're in this sort of expansionist mood and expansionist, behavior, sooner or later you're going to step on other people's toes, not just on Armenia. And when it comes to the likes of India or Russia or whichever regional or global power you consider, it is much better for them to deal with these issues that clearly are leading to a path of conflict sooner, while the flame is still small, than let it burn out of control and then be forced to deal with it. You know, like Vahram was saying, it's clear the intention of Turkey and Azerbaijan. There is a clear intention to create a grand Turan. And this Turan, if you just think about it, is against everybody's interests. That such a Turan would run, like Vahram was saying, from the Mediterranean Black Seas via Turkey, across the Caucasus, and into Central Asia. It would give Turkey, who already has very strained relations with the West, and is acting increasingly like, let's call them an independent actor, natural resources to be able to push its agenda. It would put itself on par economically and resources-wise with Europe. It would present a very, very serious challenge to China with their Muslim minorities. It would present a very huge challenge to Russia with their Turkic minorities. And it would present a huge, huge challenge to India via Pakistan. And let's not fall for their over-romanticizing of their Turkic brotherhood. The reality is this is expansionist. 1 minute they can be, championing Turan. Next minute they'll be championing the Ottoman Empire, and then the next minute they'll be championing Islam, and then the next minute they will be championing just that they're wonderful people and they need to spread their wonderfulness to wherever they go. This is pure and simple expansionism, the way it's existed over centuries, and the intention is just to take more and more. And most critically, this is the difference, for example, maybe with Armenians and with Azerbaijan and Turkey. There is no, this is what we want. If we get this, we will be happy. It will be end of it. We will move on to other things. There is no end to this. It will constantly get pushed until it is hit back, until it collapses in and of itself. Now, if you think about all of the countries I just mentioned, many of them are rivals with each other. India and China, big rivals at the moment. Europe, the US and Russia, big rivals at the moment. The Arabic countries, etc., all rivals with each other. And yet this monolith that's looking to expand in all directions is going to hit all of them. And I think, going back to the point I just made a little earlier, if there is a place in the world that I think all of the global and regional powers can get together and work out the initial steps of reining back all of this conflict, I think Armenia and the Caucasus more widely are probably the best place in the world to start with. And with that, hand it back to you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Michael, once again. Before we continue towards the questions and answers session, I'd like to just offer some comments of my own from each speaker. So we had our first speaker was retired Major General Ashok Kumar, who stressed how Indians can sympathize with Armenia's plight because of the common struggles of indigenous peoples against foreign invaders. He also highlighted that Azerbaijan every few years attacked Nagorno-Karabakh up until the major war in 2020, suggesting that this has been a prolonged and sustained project by Azerbaijan. Vahan, an author and a global energy and security specialist who supports several initiatives of the network state, provided a deeper context with 8 points, which I won't list all of them, but did include local and regional dimensions, a struggle between an indigenous population and native settlers. He also said that Azeri settlers look at Nagorno-Karabakh as a resource-rich region, which suggests that there's no legitimate connection to the land and them. He said that the Azeri settlers look at he said that he stressed that trade routes are also at the heart of the issue, and added that Azerbaijan's gas potential is actually over-exaggerated, but that the Western and other international energy companies still have vested interests nonetheless. Varam, our third speaker, explained that there's been a systemic effort to wipe out Armenian civilization for good, and over many, many centuries. You know, we saw this with Western Armenia just about a century ago, which we now call today Eastern Turkey. And it also includes many pogroms, massacres, and genocide as part of this effort to wipe out Armenian civilization. He stressed the Greater Turan project, the project to Turkify the great region that expands from the Balkans all the way to Western China and even at the gates of India, which naturally, you know, includes the absorption of Armenia too. But this is only prevented because of the southern Armenian province of Sionik, as he had already explained to us. Due to this collective threat, he stressed the need for Armenia and India to cooperate at a much deeper level, including with an Indian military base in Armenia. Varam also stressed India is the most appropriate country to create a balance in the Caucasus region. And finally, our final speaker, Michael Nassisian, said that last month's attack was expected, but still surprised many in the West. He says that Azerbaijan's attack made the USA look silly, since it made it look like they didn't know what was going on. But it also made Russia look weak, especially with the peacekeepers who were killed and effectively forgotten about. He says Azerbaijan is making many mistakes and used the analogy of the straw that broke the camel's back. The journalist also highlighted that although many ordinary citizens have not noticed what's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh, world leaders are certainly noticing what's going on. He warns that the expansionism can only be stopped when hit back, and that the East-West rivalry can be stopped by greater cooperation between the international community. So with that, I'd like to open it up for a question and answers session. And I'd like it that any questions that are asked will be directed towards a specific speaker, if possible. And in this
yes,
case,
sir.
yes.
Yes, sir, you can continue.
Oh, I was going to say, if there are any questions, please direct them. And if there are not, I'd like to pass on the vote of thanks to the Red Lantern Analytica.
We do have a few questions, sir. So I'll start
Great.
with them right away. Yes, sir. So the first question is addressed to Vahan, sir. So how has the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict contributed to political unrest and agitation within Armenia? And what are the broader implications for the region? If you can elaborate on that.
Thank you for the question. It has, until maybe the 2020 war, the Nagorno-Karabakh issue was a unifying force, to be honest with you, in Armenia, by and large. Okay, net impact was, even though there were some dissenting voices here and there, but it was, net impact was a unifying force, it was a rallying point, and so on and so forth. After the 2020 war, where Armenia lost quite a lot of territory. Well, Karabakh lost a lot of occupied territory. It was much more difficult to manage that military setback. And there was failure of politics, to be honest with you. Failure to create a unified national vision of how to handle this setback. I'm not calling it defeat intentionally, because defeat has all types of different connotations, but it was definitely a major military setback. So to this day, I don't think Armenia has fully recovered, even though there are now some serious progress, which is not that visible. What's visible at the publicly available information level, at the news level, and so on, is some of this discord within the politics. Political leadership, which in my opinion, one of the main functions or obligations of political leadership at a time like this, is to actually unify the nation. Is to encourage, to give hope, to show the way forward. In that sense, neither the political leadership nor the opposition in Armenia succeeded in creating a unified message. So it did create discord after, especially, in fact, much higher discord after the setbacks of 2020. Now, to some extent, some say that's probably normal, natural, even though in my view, military setbacks have as much power to unify a nation as to divide it. And I was hoping that in this case, it would unify Armenia more than it divided it, Armenia. But the problem is that the unifying forces, in a way, were weaker. And part of it is because there was substantial difference in how to handle this. For example, the current prime minister's declaration that he admits Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan was a major unilateral and unnecessary concession. Now, I believe in concessions in politics, right? Especially when you have emerged from war, concessions are part of the game. But every concession should be made in a very calculated way. You should negotiate something in return. It should never be one-sided. You should always get something for the concession you made. And so you can imagine when in the preceding 26 years, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh was the rallying point or the unifying force. All of a sudden, one leader says, yes, I admit it's part of Azerbaijan. You can imagine what kind of tsunami this will create in terms of internal politics. And it did. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's...
Yes, sir, definitely. That was a very elaborate answer. Thank you. So my next question is to Varam, sir. So what roles do you think that Russia, France, and the United States played in mediating and influencing this Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, and how have their actions impacted the situation?
Thanks a lot for the question. Actually, my call for a more vigorous Indian participation in the region answers the question, because it is more than clear that the three countries failed, definitely failed. I mean, to address the conflict, they definitely had leverage, and they didn't exercise that leverage on the parties, and especially on the Turan party, because when I say Azerbaijan, I'm also saying Turkey. So this is a must for for those out of region understand it, right? Because when we talk about Azerbaijan, we must understand that we are also talking about Turkey. Azerbaijan is like a small reflection of Turkey in the Caucasus. So basically, these three countries definitely failed. Well, France is one of the fewest countries that has always shown pro-Armenian stance on non-state level, which is important to stress. But on state level, because since being a part of the OSCE Minsk group, they always try to play the neutral, right, game player, I mean, role. Alongside Russia and the United States. But then all of a sudden it turned out that in 2020, Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh have been left alone. I mean, against many countries attacking them, like as Van Zanoyan mentioned, right? Turkey, Israel, I would add Russia's inaction, and also some intelligence and logistical support to the Azeris, which is a very big surprise to us Armenians, because we have been very, put it bluntly, right? I mean, we have been very good ally for the Russians for the last 200 years. I mean, since East Armenia became part of the Tsarist Russia in 1828. But anyway, I mean, maybe they have forgotten about it, or maybe they didn't appreciate it. I'm talking about Russians. So basically in 2020, the 2020 showed that the Minsk OSCE Minsk group failed per se, because the Minsk OSCE Minsk group was created to prevent the war. It was created for that, but then all of a sudden, and it was defined that this OSCE Minsk group had made it clear that there is no military solution to the conflict. But it turns out that there was a military solution, and the world accepted it. And moreover, the world is now accepting the genocide of the ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So it comes to say, as Michael said, that the United Nations have become not relevant as of now. I must say that the OSCE Minsk group didn't do the job they got salaries for. So definitely they didn't do the job. I mean, the people who got salaries, they didn't do the job. They didn't perform. They didn't show the competence and most of all motivation and interest to prevent the conflict. Because as I said, this Armenian question and the systematic fight against the Armenian nation has again taken place. So if you look at the map, Armenians were living here, and now Armenians are living here. So this is a pure consecutive genocide series, so that we must study. So starting from the 19th century to now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Speaking about Turkey's role, maybe Michael, sir, can answer the next question, which is, what are Turkey's intentions in supporting Azerbaijan, and how does this align with its broader regional political ambitions, particularly in the context of increasing influence in the surrounding regions?
Hi, thanks. Look, I mentioned it when I spoke. Turkey is in an expansionist mood, and this isn't new now. This has been going on for at least 10 years. Most likely you can date it back a bit more. What they're choosing as a narrative for expansion is very flexible. This recent Israel-Hamas war that happened, Azerbaijan is an incredibly close ally of Israel. Turkey supports Hamas. How can you marry those 2 points up? You can't, except in the sense that Turkey especially has a lot of flexibility with what it allows, as long as it can project power and find avenues of expanding. It's not even, you don't even have to look far to see Turkish ambition towards northern Syria. It's toned down a little bit, but going back a bit, only a few years, you see them talking a lot about sort of Ottoman revanchism, neo-Ottoman ambitions, meaning expansion into the Arab countries. You see them talking when speaking about Turan and generally Azerbaijan. There's a lot of things that come up about northern Iran as well, where there are ethnic Turks. So, you know, Turkey is looking to expand. It will expand any which way. It will expand into the northern Caucasus, where you have the Chechens and the English and the other Muslim peoples that live in those regions. They're not Turks. They're indigenous and they've been around for a long time. And yet you will see that they will go in those regions, most likely under the flag of Islam. They will, I'm sure, find a way of moving into Georgia when the time comes. At the moment, they have quite a major presence there economically, which is, I think, what Vahram was sort of suggesting. India could very easily do in Armenia, because Armenia is now a vacant parking lot. There are no cars there. If you want, you can very easily come. The Russians, who had it, really had it, they've stepped back. Now, do they have any plans to come back? Do they have any other plans? Who knows? Nobody can really understand what's going on or how the decisions are made over there. So yeah, Turkey's approach is very flexible. Their ideology is very flexible. The only consistent part is that they are expansionist and they're looking to expand, and they will expand any which way, and they will carry on. Of that, I think it's fairly clear, unless there is a change in their not only political leaders specifically, but generally in the political ideology that they're pursuing at the moment. And that is very hard to envision at the moment. There is very little to suggest that change will happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful answer, sir. Our next question is to you, Paul, sir. How does the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh relate to the stability of the South Caucasus region and the potential disruption of oil and gas exports from Azerbaijan to other regions?
That's quite an interesting question. I don't think that the flow of energy from Azerbaijan to other regions will stop. In fact, it will only continue to accelerate to the point that it can, considering that the West is has stopped getting energy resources from Russia in a direct manner. But perhaps, if you don't mind, I might pass on the question to Vahan, who is an energy specialist and would certainly have a greater insight than what I would have.
I don't see the conflict affecting energy flows. What the problem here, what I was mentioning earlier, that some of the resources of Azerbaijan are exaggerated. Both oil and gas production in Azerbaijan are limited, they're declined. I mean, Europe, as you know, Europe made a big deal about the reliable partner statement that went viral. And the whole point there was increasing Azeri gas exports from 1% of European needs to 2%. So we're not talking about a major player here or replacing a major production like Russia. And this is not contradictory to the fact that a lot of Western oil companies have invested billions in Azerbaijan. So there are deep-rooted commercial interests, but the broader geostrategic significance as an energy supplier does not match those very large, deep-rooted commercial interests. Here is the little dilemma or a contradiction, if you want, that one day will come to the surface. Now, there's another issue here. Azerbaijan, as you all know, I don't know if you all know, but it's been reported many times, has been importing gas from Russia and has been also importing gas from other sources and sending it to Europe as Azeri gas. So there is some smoke and mirrors involved in how do you make the Azeri gas exports much larger than they are. So that combined with the commercial interest of the very large players, and this is very significant, by the way. Other countries have used this. This whole idea that you give important mining interests, doesn't have to be oil and gas, it can be molybdenum, it can be gold mining, it can be any mining. You give very significant mining interests to very powerful foreign companies, and you automatically win the government of that company as an ally, because they have commercial interest to protect. And this is something I'd like to stress, by the way, in general, because what we're talking here, and that's, Paul indirectly addressed this, it's a matter of what's the real factor that is at play is strategic interests of nations, of governments. That's all. And the fact that a Shia Muslim country like Azerbaijan is allies with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, and the fact that a Sunni Muslim country like Turkey is allied with Azerbaijan, and that at the same time is allied with Hamas, is very easily explicable. If you say, forget these ideologies, forget the religious sects, forget all this, and look at the interests at that moment of those countries. And if it suits them, they will do it. I mean, so frankly, I don't mean to sound more cynical about this than I am, but what is at play here in the world today is neither ideology, nor human rights, nor values, nor anything. It's state interests. And in some cases, state interests have changed. We question, for example, the role of Russia. Bahram mentioned how Armenia has been a very good ally of Russia for 200 years, and so on and so on, and now everything changed. Because everything in Russia has changed, especially after the Ukraine war. Russia, I think, to some extent, has put aside its long-term strategic national interests and put forward its shorter-term parochial interests of the moment. One day, the Russian Federation will look back at this, and probably they will regret this shift, because by sacrificing their long-term strategic interest and allowing Turkey into the Caucasus, for example, which was taboo until their involvement in the Ukraine war, all of a sudden is acceptable because they have much more immediate other interests to address. And some of those interests that Russians, I believe, are addressing is that the Russian elite and the Azeri elite are also in commercial cahoots. They have commercial interests together. So it comes down to either national or state level strategic interests or the commercial interests of a certain elite in each country. That's the only way I can make sense of this world. There's no other way I can make. Otherwise, the friend of your enemy can still be your enemy or your friend. You know, that old logic, the friend of my friend is my friend, doesn't apply. The friend of my enemy is my enemy doesn't apply. As long as those interests are playing, none of these logics apply. The only thing that applies is to look at how the interests have shifted.
Well, thank you so much, Vahan sir, for your valuable inputs. It definitely made a lot of sense, and to understand this concept whole in better way. So my last question is to Major General Ashok sir. So, how prominent do you see India's role to play in the whole conflict?
Actually, India's role is very, very important, and I think India has, taken note of that. While the how Armenia helps Indian strategic interest in getting connectivity because of its geographic location to northwest and western countries, that is one issue. But there is another angle because of which Armenia is the only country in the world where India has exported the equipment which can participate in the active operations. It has given it the Pinaka regiment. Of course, I think in terms of time, its numbers and other things have got delayed for whatever be the reasons, and it has not impacted the outcome of war as it should have. But India, though it has been exporting warlike stores to multiple countries in the world, but they were of a minor nature, of more of a logistical nature, surveillance equipment at best. But this is the first country in the world, and that too, which was at war. And that time, India has decided to give the fighting equipment, like Pinaka regiment, which I told. So the mere fact, when you export the weapons to a country which is already at the conflict, you take a open side of that country in aligning your national interest and preserving the national interest of the recipient country. So that extent, I think Armenia weighs a lot in Indian national scan, political, strategic, and military. However, as highlighted by Mr. Vehram, I think the intensity and the canvas both has to be much more larger, and there is a visible space where it can. I'm not only talking about it helping Armenia militarily alone. It can also, I think India is the only country in the world where it has got the leverage both with the USA and Russia of a equal magnitude, and large number of other countries, including the Western Asian nations. I think that political connect can also be leveraged in a big way to assist Armenia at this juncture, besides enhancing its military strength. I think Armenia will do well to have an Indian military training team, which can assist in building its military, because if the political discourse doesn't settle in its national interest, I think the military has to be equally strong, and for that the training has to be started right now in that direction. It doesn't mean that you are going to be at war with Azerbaijan, but should that situation arise, you should not be found wanting. Thank you.
So there's another question to you, sir, for the in the chat box. Since we are running short on time, maybe you can briefly answer this. Do you think India would put an Indian army base in Armenia? Just a brief answer, sir.
Uh, I think there is a possibility, but it will depend how the Armenian government looks at it. As I advocated, having a training team, that is one issue. But if India per se has not made too many bases, they have made certain bases in certain countries, at air force base, naval base, and military bases, but not too many in the world, as has been done by China. But I think if Armenia is willing, it will be a good issue to be considered. That is what I can, leave it, being a political person. It is up to the government of the day to take a call on that. But there's a lot of merit if it comes.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful Q&A session. Paul, sir, you have the platform if you would like to add any comments. Otherwise, we would straight away would like to invite Karneet from our team for the vote of thanks.
We'll go straight to the vote of thanks. I think all of our speakers have very effectively covered everything that's needed to be done today, and clarified anything else that needed to be done through this Q&A session. So once again, thank you. I'll pass it on to Varam just before we have the vote of thanks, though.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just a very, short comment about the Indian presence in Armenia. And we at the Network State, as a pan-Armenian movement, we consider India as a joker in international relations, as the general mentioned, like a joker in terms of like having China, having the West and Russia. Having relations both with the West and Russia on equal level, and having its own independent politics. That's why also, but most importantly, as I mentioned, the civilizational ties also play a key role, because Indian army definitely would be very welcoming to the Armenian people. But this, notion of India as equally acceptable in Russia and in the West also plays a key role within our, at least, Network State platform to call for more Indian presence in Armenia. Thank you.
Great. We'll move on to the vote of thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. So on behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I would like to extend our sincerest gratitude for the extraordinary webinar on Azerbaijan's aggression over Armenia's Nagorno-Karabakh. The session moderated by Mr. Paul was a resounding success, and we deeply appreciate your efforts in making it a truly enlightening and thought-provoking event. Mr. Paul, your adept moderation and insightful views were pivotal in ensuring a seamless flow of information throughout the webinar. Your skillful navigation of the discussions allowed for a thorough exploration of the complex issues at hand, and we would like to commend you for your dedication to the event's success. We extend a heartfelt thanks to Major General Ashok, Mr. Varam, Mr. Vahan, and Mr. Michael for their invaluable contributions as expert panelists. Major General Ashok's comprehensive overview of the conflict interwoven with India's role, the displacement of ethnic communities, and the historical context provided a solid foundation of understanding the conflict's evolution. Mr. Vahan's exploration of the conflicting perspectives on the land, the legal aspects, and the role of external actors shed light on the multifaceted dimensions of the issue. His insights into the geopolitical and trade aspects, as well as the military dimension too, and petroleum resources in Azerbaijan were exceptionally informative. Mr. Varam's emphasis on Azerbaijan's aggression and its implications for regional dynamics, particularly in the context of the Tehran project and the need for collaboration and support among nations, added a critical dimension to the discussions. His insight into the revival of European trade routes as well were truly enlightening. Lastly, Mr. Michael's perspective on the instability of Azerbaijan's movements, the role of the United Nations, and the impact of expansionist views by regional and global powers provided a well-rounded conclusion to the webinar. His thoughts on the global implications of this conflict resonated deeply. This discussion was remarkable, and each panelist offered an incredible, unique perspective that enhanced our understanding of this intricate issue. Your dedication to explaining every aspect of this conflict with proficiency and how narratives are evolving actually was greatly appreciated. I also want to express my gratitude to Red Lantern Analytica for organizing this insightful event. The commitment to facilitating meaningful discussions on pressing global issues is commendable, and I look forward to more events of this caliber. It is an absolute privilege to even attend this webinar, and thank you everyone for joining in and for providing your perspectives for the same. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karneet. If we have permission of all our speakers, we would like to bring this session to an end. Thank you so much once again for being a part of this webinar.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
We can now end this meeting.
Thank you.